technically speaking, we have to be accurate about it. When we talk about karma, we will have to be clear that karma is about action. Now, action, again, from a Buddhist context, we have to be very clear. Action is not just physical action. All right, so physical action is like the very obvious, right? You take something and you lift it up, put it down. All right, you hit somebody, or you do something bad to somebody. So it's a physical action most times. All right. Now, the physical action is actually a late aspect of the karma, of the whole thing about karma. Because when you talk about karma, right, it's action, right? So action has to be triggered by something. Okay. So what comes before that, right? What are the thought processes, the intentions, the basis of those intentions are actually what's important in this whole process. Because very often when you chant in Buddhism and all that, we talk about body, speech, and mind, that kind of thing, right? So what exactly does it mean, you see? Because most times we only talk about the body doing something, right? Or the mouth saying something, right? And then with the mind, then you say, what exactly it means, body, speech, and mind, okay? So we have to remember that when we talk about karma, it has to be triggered by something. So the action is triggered by an intention. All right, so it's a volitional action. That means it's an action that you consciously choose to do. Right, that means you make a choice. In a way, you make a choice, you make an effort to go in that direction. Right? Maybe perhaps I would not say so clearly as in, when I say in a choice or intention, we very often think of it as there's something that makes the decision. Right? So in Buddhism, this gets very complex here, because it's not very often very clear what makes the decision, right? But what we know is there are many factors that influence this decision, all right? And for one, the very important thing that actually influences the decision is whether you have a good understanding of reality, okay? A good understanding of reality means you understand the world as not satisfactory, the world as non-self, right? And being impermanent, right? So that is the understanding that we call in Buddhism wisdom. And the lack of wisdom or understanding of these things is what we call ignorance, okay? Now, when I mentioned to you just now, very often we make a choice, all right? We think there is like a person there that is actually making a choice to make a decision. But the reality is you are driven by this, not understanding these three characteristics I mentioned to you. In other words, the unsatisfactoriness, the impermanence, and the not-self nature of all phenomena. Okay? Because there is this lack of understanding, your mental processes can go one way or the other. Okay? So if you say, for example, you do not intrinsically understand, say, impermanence, right? So you will hold on to your things and protect your property as if it is permanent, as if it will stay with you forever. And therefore, it is driven with this ignorance of permanence, right? And then therefore, there is a bit of clinging and all this. And that predisposes you to act in a certain way, right? Even though there might not be a self that's acting in that way, but it predisposes you. It provides the condition for you to act in a way that is not wise. Okay, so this comes back to the word karma, action. Now, when you act in the way that is not wise, not in line with reality, right, what will happen is reality is not going to make you happy because it's going to give you a result and outcome that it has by its own rules, right? So there's a reality rules that will give you a result in line with reality. And if you think or act with the misunderstanding of reality, it will not align, okay? And it will not come to your liking, okay? When it doesn't come to your liking, you will feel the discomfort, the uneasiness, the unhappiness, all right? And that's what we in Buddhism call, in simple terms, suffering. Now, in daily life, very often we don't talk about karma in this way. right? Very often, as I said, you do something, you step on an ant, you kick a dog, then you say, okay, this is bad karma. You do something bad, right? So again, because I said a lot of these things is due to intention, due to your programming, your conditions, because you have no understanding of the reality of the world. Therefore, reality doesn't align with you. The end result is an action, as I said, that produces an outcome that doesn't align with your own reality or what you want. Okay. Now, in the day-to-day world, we may not see this as a very clear process. All right. Because we are very much programmed by what we are told. And unfortunately, in popular Buddhism, is very often highlighted in a very interesting way as, if you do A, you get A. You do B, you get B. It's very like one-to-one mapping. But what I mentioned to you just now, if you just think a little bit deeper, it is more complex than that, right? Because your intentions, your actions, that means your intentions will trigger an action. The action may be through your body, through your speech, through your mind. That means you're just even a thought process, all right? And all these processes that you trigger will have consequences, all right? And the consequences are similar too. So in other words, consequences can be mental, can be physical, right? Or even you can say loosely, it can be some sort of spiritual consequence, all right? Now, if you again look at it from another way, we often try to equate one-to-one actions with its outcome. But you all know that in the real world of everything that we do, very few things have a one-to-one sort of matching of action and its outcome, all right? Because there are many other factors beyond your action that produces the result that you see. So in other words, if you do a particular action, that is generally likely to produce a particular outcome. But there are many other circumstances in the environment, right? Say, for example, the weather, other people, other physical things, other biological things that can come into play that will alter the outcome of your action. All right. So very often we like to blame, the outcome of karma as if it is the only thing in the entire world that controls everything. That is not true. You may not think that this is part of Buddhism, but actually it is there in Buddhism. Okay? Karma is but one of the forces or general laws of nature that affects the outcome of actions. Now, why do I say that? Like, for example, say a person who is, say, born maybe not in a very fortunate situation, say maybe they have abnormality when they're born. So very often as a Buddhist, you say, okay, maybe they past bad karma, right? So we always like to blame it on the past bad karma. Maybe it is, right? But we will never know because for the person to be born, right? First, there must be a being that maybe perhaps previous to that allows the rebirth after passing away. Number two, they might have two biological parents which have different genetics. The parents are exposed to environmental factors, like maybe radiation, maybe toxins, or what they eat or what they've been exposed to, for whatever reasons, right? And all this may contribute to the outcome of the being born normal, abnormal, mildly abnormal to grossly abnormal, right? So despite the fact that they are born normal, abnormal, whatever it is, then there is the whole life ahead that can be that can produce outcomes in many ways, right? So it doesn't mean that you start with a poor outcome, like say, for example, born with some abnormality. It doesn't mean you have a life that's going to be suffering all the way, right? So how are you going to differentiate what aspects of it are truly due to karma? You can't, all right? Because there's so many other factors. Say, for example, they're born into the family, again, as if it is abnormality, but they have a very nurturing family, right? Family who happens to be relatively wealthy, maybe. So they have all the support systems for them to maximize whatever potential they have and minimize what other suffering that they can have, right? And this person can have a relatively good outcome compared to somebody who is born in a very good family, but not supportive, right? And even with the best genes, they lead a poor life on themselves, which they have because of poor understanding of Dhamma. They may lead a very poor life and they destroy their own lives, all right? So I'm sure we have seen many examples of this, right? You say, wow, this one, I know this fella from no very poor background, but now they've done so well. Then others, wow, so lucky in a good background, but it's destroyed their lives, right? Right? So you can see it's not just karma. Karma is just one factor, right? So karma may be a factor that gives you a head start, or or gives you some sort of like impediment at the start, some disadvantage, but you can always make it better because this is part of only one small part of the four wheels of the car. Just say, all right. So one wheel doesn't change everything. You can't say that there's no effect, but you can, if there are three other wheels that deal with your life, you can at least change three out of the four. You can modify. All right. So that is actually the beauty of karma. All right. Now, very often people talk of karma almost as if it's fatalistic. Right? In other words, once it's determined, set in stone, cannot change. Oh, it's my bad karma, I'm like that. And my bad karma, I'm like that. Honestly, this is just a lazy way out. That's not Buddhism. Okay? That's a lazy way out. You're not willing to take responsibility for your choices, for your life. All right? So in Buddhism, actually, it's a very positive message, which is often lost in this thinking of karma as something that condemns you to either a good or bad life, right? But instead of that, actually, Buddhism talks about interdependence, multifactorial, influence of various factors in your life. Therefore, whatever you start with, it can be changed for the better if you apply the correct techniques, right? Apply it with wisdom. If you develop wisdom, it is always possible to move ahead and modify your karma as such. Okay? You start with a bad hand, you can end with a better hand. You start with a good hand, you can also destroy it. So both ways it works. All right? Now, this is where it is extremely different from some systems where they talk of karma as, it's more or less your lot. If you're born in this particular strata of society or whatever, and you're condemned for life because you just have to accept it. You can't change it, right? And I think the Buddha was very against that idea. And that's very common in his time in India, where there was a caste system, and they were like, once you're born in the caste system, basically you're screwed, right? You can't get out of it, right? And everybody agrees that you should stay there, right? So in Buddhism, there's always this possibility that you can move along, you can modify the situation, and whether you modify the situation to produce a good outcome or bad outcome depends, in a way, your choices, but the choices are propelled by your experience, your environment, and your level of wisdom. Now, this is so important here because very often when we talk about karma, we rarely talk about what is behind it in terms of wisdom. All right? Now, wisdom, everybody thinks is something very esoteric, very, you only sit there, then got light coming out throughout your head, and that's wisdom. All right? Actually, there's a very practical aspect of wisdom which we all have forgotten. Right? Now, just take a step back and ask yourself, what are the things that produce happiness, right? And generally peace of mind? And that is something that you have to ask yourself and look very, very deeply. What are the things that produce this that are generally within your control? All right? And why is it that these things produce good outcomes? All right? Like I mentioned to you just now, in Buddhism, we talk about the three characteristics of existence, right? So I think you're all familiar with that. One is, of course, suffering or unsatisfactoriness. All right. So I don't like to use the word suffering very often because it just means it's as if it's just physical. It's not that. All right. So when we talk about suffering or unsatisfactoriness, it's just something that is not to your liking. That's all. I will just put it something not to your liking. All right. The second thing is, of course, impermanence. Much as we all know everything is impermanent, I don't think many of us would require any scientific proof of it. It's just very evident for all of us. All right. And the last one, which is difficult, is the non-self nature. Okay, we'll talk about that in a while. Now, being able to know the theory of it is a good starting point. It is not exactly just knowing the theory means you can do it. Much as we know things are impermanent, but yet we behave as if things are permanent. Strange, right? It's very, very strange. And every time we do it, we realize that, oh no, it has to go. It has to break down. It has to fade, right? And when it happens, why am I so uncomfortable about it? Why is it so unsatisfactory, right? Even in my happiness, I'm elated, but yet it it will pass, right? And when it passes, it is not nice again, right? It's not nice again. But why is it I know it again and again, but yet I let it happen to me all the time? I just let it happen, right? So how do we deal with this problem? Right? One way of dealing with this problem is not about just reminding yourself of impermanence and unsatisfactoriness of the world, but very importantly, to realize that you need to be able to see this directly at the source. All right? So now what is the source of this? Source is not recognizing it at its basic nature. All right? You can theorize it, you can look at it and just argue it out, but you have to see it close up. And the best way to see it close up is during a meditative process, right? Where you have very sharp awareness and you see that things come and go, come and go. Your likes and dislikes also come and go. Today you like it, tomorrow you don't like it. All right. I like sushi today. I eat too much sushi. I don't like the sushi anymore. Right. So it's the same problem, right? So it's not that the sushi has changed. You can still have wonderful sushi. I give you every day, 3 meals a day, 5 meals a day sushi. You see whether you like it or not. Right? It hasn't changed, right? But you have to know it up close. And because a lot of times when it passes, we forget, right? So what is the meditative process for? It's for you to sit down, and even when it is not obviously there, actually it's in your mind, this latent inability to see that this happens all the time. And it happens not just for your likings and dislikes, but it also happens with all your thoughts, right? Your thoughts and all that, which come and go, programmed by your karma, which is again what you inherited, what you are exposed to in your environment. So learn behaviors, all right? So learn behaviors also, in a way, is your karma, right? You learn it because of the environment that you're exposed to, and you become habitual, right? So that kind of thought processes just sort of like, it's etched there and it becomes habit. All right. So all this has to be seen in the meditative process. And when you see it in the meditative process, devoid of the actual stimulus, eh, it will translate into a better understanding and appreciation of it in everything around you. Now, the last characteristic which I have not said too much about is the characteristic of non-self. All right. So in various schools of Buddhism, this is explained differently. But the long and short of it all is actually quite simple. Non-self is essentially the idea that nothing has intrinsic identity that is unchanging. All right? I like to always talk about it like a table, for example. A table is a concept that we were taught. That you have a table, it means that there's something that you can put on top of the table, right? And if you want shelter, you can climb under the table. Okay? But of course, the table has to be big enough for you to climb under, right? So it's a concept. So the table doesn't have a tableness of the table, but the tableness is something that we define, something that has a top, that you can put something on top, something that you can crawl under, something has got 3 legs, 4 legs, or whatever to balance it, or 1 leg even, right? but it is defined by function, it is defined by convention, it's defined by society, and also defined by language. We call it a table, but in different language called different things, right? It's seen by human beings sometimes as a table, sometimes as an ornament or some decoration, right? When you don't think about it as a table, so you look at it, hey, it's actually a table or can be used as a table, but we call it something else because if we didn't use it as a table, then it's just a decoration, all right? An animal that walks by doesn't know what it is, so it doesn't have a concept of table, so it is maybe just a shelter. If it rains, it just hide underneath. Okay, so there's no tableness of table. So physical objects very easy, right? But unfortunately, human beings, after we give the label, we are very rigid about the label. Right? We just keep on harping on the label, and this is how branding actually works on your head. Okay, how they brand something and then suddenly the thing becomes so precious, right? Right. Like for example, I mean, this recent hoo-ha about branded bags and all that, right? We all know, right? That has blown up in the social media. A bag is a bag, right? Just because you slap a label on it, suddenly becomes so expensive and so precious. Before that label, no difference, right? And we all know there are a lot of things that are branded, made in, say, for example, made in China. Just it, right? We all know, right? But the moment you say made in China, I'm like, can't be that good, lah, right? But when you put the big name down there, oh, it's better. But if I don't put a big name down there, it's not so good. But it's the same bag. Okay. So again, it is the non-self nature of the matter, all right? Or in Mahayana terms, sometimes they say emptiness of it. Okay, it is empty. But our misconceptions, unfortunately, right, or this kind of thinking process, right, of putting labels and holding on to it tightly as if they actually exist, right? That actually makes us deluded or adds on to our ignorance and our unhappiness. Therefore, if we do not get a bag made from China, we are not so unhappy. But we do not get a bag made from Italy, suddenly we are more unhappy. But it's just a bag. Okay, so yeah. I'm not saying that you cannot appreciate something that is beautiful. That's fine. But it should stop there. Oh, this one very nice. Okay, stop there. That's it. It is what it is. I like this. Yeah, I like it just because I like it. That's it. That's all there is. And when somebody says, oh, you think, no need to justify. You just like it. That's it. End of story. All right. And if you're attached to it, you're just attached to it. End of story. No need to go and talk so much about it. As long as you recognize its nature, and you also recognize it will break down, it will go away, right? And it's impermanent. Right? And when it happens, you're not going to be too happy about it. Okay? Now, the more difficult thing is, of course, when it applies to yourself. Right? So how do you know? Why is it? What's the big problem if it applies to yourself? The reality is that it's not easy to see it because from the day you were born, you're given a name, right? And everybody calls you by that name. And you differentiate yourself from the environment by building a personality, right? And after a while, you actually try to convince yourself or believe that this personality is quite rigid, it's quite solid, it's not changing, is I'm like that one, I'm just like that. All right. No, it's really not like that, right? Things change. When you're a kid, when you're an adult, you might like the same thing or you may not like the same thing. You have changed, right? Physically, you have changed. Mentally, you have changed. Again, this is a very obvious thing that is visible when you sit down and meditate. When you realize that your mind runs in all directions, things come, things go, things you never thought you knew, things you never thought you were like, or whatever will appear. And that is why some people, when they first go for a meditation retreat or the very first time they meditate, they get quite distressed. Because finally they see all these things. It's like, what the hell is going on in my head? Why is this happening? Right? I didn't think like that. Or I'm not like that. But it's happening. Why? No, it's always been there. Right? So your so-called self is nothing more than a whole bunch of processes of mental and physical processes that interact. Right? Your environment affected, your understanding of the world, your conditioning, and conditioning in a way I would say is karma, right? That all of it affected. And when that happens, in the daily life, we just don't look at it and we assume that it is solid. But the reality is it's not. right? When you actually look closely in meditation, you suddenly realize, hey, this is not solid. This is so weird. Why am I thinking like that? Why do I have these thoughts? I never knew that I like this or I dislike this or I'm like that or I'm not like that. Why can't I push this nasty thought away, right? Um, no, it can't, right? Because if the conditions are there for it to appear, it will appear, you know, right? And you can only observe, let it come, let it go, and understand what it is. There's nothing more than a mess of conditions, whether mental and physical, and how mental and physical interact continuously. All right. Now, all these things put together is an interplay of karma and the environment that you have around you. Okay. And this essentially is how karma works in everyday life. Nothing very complicated, nothing very mystical. We like to talk about it, right? So the next question is, can you do certain things to modify your karma? Well, as I mentioned to you just now, right? If you can modify the way that you are motivated, the way that you think, then some aspects of karma can be changed. But remember, changing that does not guarantee an outcome that will be in line because there are multiple other factors that can affect it. All right. So do not get the idea that I do this ceremony or I just only change my thinking this way. Everything is going to fall in line perfectly. No, it doesn't have to. Right. That's part of the nature of the world. It is impermanent. It is non-self. Right. It is your ignorance of all these things in the form of not being able to internalize it and apply it to all stuff in the world that will make the difference. Right. The world was never meant to suit you. A lot of people say, oh, why the world like that? No, it's never meant to suit you anyway. It goes by its own rules, it goes by its own conditions and causes. Is that when you interact with it, the only thing that is within your control, in a way, is your understanding of it. And that understanding will determine whether you see it in the correct perspective and therefore whether it gives you suffering or happiness. All right? So this again ties in very well with most Buddhist teachings, right? In Buddhist teachings, I think if you talk about of course, in like say maybe the Theravada teachings, it is more black and white. But if you go to the Mahayana teaching, they say, oh, everything is pure, everything, right? The whole, the Nirvana and Samsara, no different. This is exactly what they mean, actually. This is what you make of it. Because nothing has changed. The day the Buddha became enlightened, or the Gautama became enlightened, did the world change? No, the world didn't change. Right? It's how he understood the world that changed. Right? How he saw the world that changed. His mental state had altered to a point where everything it's like waking up in a brand new day when the whole world looks different. That's all. Right? And therefore, suffering suddenly seems to have disappeared. Right? But does it mean there's no physical suffering? Does it mean there's no illness? There's no death? No, it carries on. Life goes on. Right? But the wisdom will allow the change in perspective. And this is not something that is easy just to reason out, but we have to go deeper and observe. And that observation will change your mindset and will change your understanding and therefore will change your behavior pattern and your conditioning. Because by observing, understanding, you trigger a change in your motivations and your worldview. And when that changes, that's how karma changes. All right? Nothing mystical. So if anything at all, I would like to end here, right? And just to remind you that when you talk about karma in daily life, don't get too engrossed in just the outcome or what is obvious to you. There are many other processes that go on behind the scenes, right? And those things are equally important compared to the physical outcome that you see. And physical outcome that you see sometimes does not match because other factors are at play, right? And karma is but one of the many factors that are at play. All right, so do not get discouraged if something doesn't turn out so well. It happens, okay? But that should not prevent you from continuing to grow in wisdom, all right? Growing in wisdom means understanding the world as it is and generating positive causes and conditions to produce positive mind states at the very least, and hopefully physical outcomes further down the line. Okay, I think I have to stop here so we get a few minutes just for questions. Thank you.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Yeah, so brothers and sisters, any questions for Dr. Kenneth Tan? Anyone still confused between, karma is actually actions and then not so much on the outcome? Actually, yep.
Hello. Yeah, Dr. Tan. So where does karma begins? It begins from the thought or it starts from the action?
It starts with the thought.
So if it's a thought but without action, it's still
karma. Because you think about it. Okay, say for example, you for some reason you have a negative thought against somebody, right? The negative thought against somebody, but you didn't act on it. You just have this. So every time the person walks past you, you get a little bit agitated, you get a bit unhappy, right? You didn't do anything physically, but that already has a consequence. I'm sure all of us have had that experience before, right? Somebody that you don't like, for some strange reason, whether there are reasons for it physically because you have had previous encounters, experience, or whatever. Somebody that you don't like, or somebody that that you have a wrong impression of, even sometimes because of misunderstanding, and it triggers a thought, say for example, that is driven by, say, anger, for example. I just don't like this one. So that's already a bit of anger and discomfort, right? So that discomfort that you feel is already a reaction of the karma, or the outcome of the karma already. You know what I mean? It's already triggered. Even though you do not act out, you don't go there and scold the guy or go there and whack the guy, the things, but it's already there. Okay? So at the very base of all actions are actually triggered by mental processes. And those mental processes are backed up, or sort of the basis of it can be wholesome or unwholesome.
Okay. So next question. So if a person with low IQ would conduct some some killing, so would this considered is bad karma?
It really depends. Okay, so the person, say for example, of very low IQ, his ability to appreciate what's going on is not there. So when he kills somebody, for example, right, he may not know that he's actually causing harm, right? So it's like ignorance. So it's no different from a blind person, or for us sometimes when we, in the dark, we step on something and kill something. No different from that, because you may not know, right? And you did not knowingly do it out of hatred or anything that's negative, right? So in a way, you will say that more likely than not, right, there will not be an evil consequence, even though there's a death, right? It's almost like an accident, okay? Now, the other thing that we have to be very careful, because of the complexity of this whole situation, is that we try not to sort of like second guess, the intentions and the outcomes of karma. Let's not second guess it. I mean, Buddhists are very guilty of this, We always say, oh, this one like that because, they are like that. No, let's not second guess, because there are too many factors. We really don't know, right? Maybe perhaps if you are a Buddha, maybe you will know, right? Only in the Buddhist stories, they say sometimes the Buddha say, oh, I can see this and that. Okay, but irrelevant to us lay people, right? Because it makes no difference. And what good does it do anyway? It doesn't do anything. So more important is to apply it to yourself, right? So that it guides your day-to-day actions in your life. And for the best outcome and for your decrease in mental, sort of mental discomfort. That's more important.
Brother and sister, any more questions? Yep.
Doc, going back to the example you gave about somebody passing and you really don't like this person, how would you handle it so that you don't have the karma?
Okay, so I think in the initial phase, when it happens, right? I mean, it is so quick, right? you almost have no time to arrest it. But I think the first step of controlling this situation is if you can practice mindfulness, you will notice it happening first. The first time you practice mindfulness, you will find that this person passes, this unpleasant feeling arises, right? And then there's a little bit of a volitional thing, like I just can't stand the sight of this person. I want to slap this person or whatever, the thought comes to mind, right? Okay, so that's the first step. Now, the second step would be to try to, that means after this first step, if you noticed it, you already know the cause of it, right? You know that this has triggered all these things. So the next step is to learn how to nip it in the bud. The moment the person comes back, you notice it, then you let it pass before the next thought arises. Just let it pass. You take a note of it, sight of this person, let go. That's it, done, move. You may not succeed. That means it may have gone down. It will go down another few more steps, right? It doesn't matter. If it's a behavior or whatever that's been implanted for so long, it will take time. It's not going to happen tomorrow, all right? And in Buddhism, because we understand all these cause and effect relationships, we always allow ourselves a little bit of leeway. It's okay. It doesn't matter. Yeah. As well as you know it, you can have an opportunity to nip it as early as possible. And as your mindfulness improves, you can nip it earlier and earlier and earlier and earlier and earlier. All right. Up to the point that the sight of the person is just the sight of the person, and that's it. It ends there. All right. So step by step, lah. But remember to be kind to yourself and don't hammer yourself for it, lah. Right. Okay.
Hello. Hear me? Yeah. So I wanted to ask a question which is actually similar to one which you already answered, but I also would like to summarize what I heard in terms of generalize the message. So I heard a metaphor. If seeds drop unattended, they will grow into a forest, into a jungle, right? And so the point is apply our wisdom, what we are talking about, in a way to address seeds before they become a forest. So, yeah. I guess, yeah, there was some kind of question, but like, yeah, kind of. I think it's become a statement.
Yeah, I think it's a good one because it is true. So it's about nipping it early, right? But it also works, in the other way. If you want to nurture it, or you want it to grow into a forest, something that is wholesome or produces, a good outcome, then of course you want to nurture it, right? Because letting a seed grow into a forest naturally is not so easy. Even whether it's good or bad, it doesn't matter. It's not so easy. It needs a lot of other factors, right? You need the weather, which is all the physical causes. You need the water, the soil, and what have you, right? So there's a lot of other factors. So again, this reminds you of the interdependence of a lot of factors, right? The seed may be there, but it doesn't always grow, right? But again, when you feed it or you allow it to grow in the correct environment or the wrong environment, it's like somebody who is living a life within the wrong environment of friends, for example, who are friends, inverted commas, right? And then they will nurture the wrong seeds, and then it will grow wrongly, and then it will give you a lot of trouble after that, right? So it's a multiple factors, really a lot of factors that come together to produce an outcome, right? And this is where, your ability to catch it early, to be able to differentiate whether it leads to your happiness or your suffering, that will determine, right, whether it is something worth nurturing or not nurturing, right? But at the same time, understanding that despite the nurturing, it may grow into a forest or it may still die off. Okay.
I heard from many people saying, I don't have it. I had it before, but I don't have it anymore. And it feels like when person says something like this, the seed already planted. They already missed it.
Because you see, when they say that I don't have it anymore, or I had it before, this is actually a problem because, like what I mentioned before, is they have a sense of permanence, all right? A sense of identity that's unchanging. So that is actually the crucial part that needs to be dealt with. You know, it's about this idea that I'm like that. I can't change, you know, right? So this is in itself is a problem. And I think the best way that a person can start dealing with this is making them realize that over the entire life, they have made many changes to their personality, which they think is very solid or rigid, right? But actually is very fluid. It always changes, right? You know, like yesterday, you may be good friends with A and B because you think the world of the person, but the next day, because the fella did something to you, suddenly now, every time you see the person, you just can't stand the sight of the person. So you have changed, right? So this is a negative example, but there's also a positive example. Like, for example, you go for a retreat, and then after that, after the retreat, you say, wow, actually, if I did this, everything else is okay. It will sort out. Then you change your life accordingly. Then you move on. So there are both positive and negative examples of this. And people who always have this rigidity, unfortunately, are tough to change because they keep resisting it. And it's actually a rejection of reality, actually. So that's tough. But we can always encourage them by giving them examples in their lives, or we can actually ask them to just watch their thoughts for a while, watch their feelings for a while, and it will come up, you know. And it may take a long time, or it may take forever. Can't do anything about it. We can try our best only.
Okay, thank you, Doctor, for your talk. Just one question about just I mentioned about the abnormal child. This abnormal child, is it the karma of this own child, his own karma, or the karma of the parents that give birth to an abnormal child?
Hard to tell, okay? Or it may be both, we wouldn't know. And it's actually not really very important anyway, all right? So more important is that, you know, if you are the parent, I think more important is to create the conditions such that the child would thrive and how to live and be happy with it, right? So that's more important. Because trying to dig into the past and trying to like figure out who's karma and you know what, it's actually quite futile, right? Because there's nothing you can do, you know. Is there anything you can do to right it? No, you can't. You can't do anything, right? And as I mentioned to you, it's multiple factors, right? It could be karma, for all you know. It could also be just a physical factor for some reason, right? Say, for example, most of us don't realize this, right? But especially today, there's so much air travel. You don't realize that every time you go up a plane, you're exposed to a lot of cosmic radiation. Right? Can that cause a mutation? Of course, that can cause a mutation, right? It's just about dose, right? At the end of the day, how many times you're exposed to it, and so happen if, say, for example, the parent is up there and maybe, or you know, the embryo is in there, just fertilized and then got hit by cosmic radiation, right? Then they didn't know even they were pregnant, right? So whose karma is it? Not really karma, right? It just happens, right? Physical factors around you. So best is not to not to you know keep on thinking about that lah. Just take the situation as it is and make the best of it. That's all. I think Buddhism always talks about not looking in the past, which is gone, not looking too much in the future has yet to come, but to just work on the present. Yeah.
So maybe we do one more last question.
So thanks, Kenneth, for sharing that karma is not really a single cause. I would like to offer another perspective is that can we also say that actually another complementary teachings from the Buddha, which is the dependent originations, helps to also answer the questions that you just actually alluded to it, which is the outcome is brought on by the cause and also conditions. It's just like the seed that we all have been talking about here. The seed can be the actions, the actions that you planted in, but the conditions around it, like the soil, the fertilizer, the sunlight, and the water, brings about whether would the seed comes into fruition. So I like to offer that maybe dependent origination is also a kind of complementary teachings to the law of karma, as in they are not just a single cause. It could be like what you just mentioned, the multifactorial topic about that.
Yeah, that's what actually I'm trying to refer to without bringing up dependent origination. Because dependent origination in its formal form of teachings, of course, refers to a lot of other things, But in its essential formula, that's what it is, really. Because of this, that arises, correct? Yeah, and it also brings about an understanding of various factors, mental factors, right? Independent origination. And dependent origination, of course, is a teaching that is not exactly tailored to this issue, but it's a more complex thing where it explains, for example, how mental states, physical states, and all that come about and how they're interrelated, right? So, yeah, but essentially you are correct, right? So, in fact, in today's, just to end the session, I think enough questions. I think time is up, right? What I've tried to do here is actually try to integrate for you the teachings, right? And you realize that even though supposed to be talking about karma, and in Buddhism, actually you realize that all the teachings are linked. All right, we talked about 3 characteristics of existence. We talked about, of course, karma and what we call also the natural forces that I mentioned just now to you, physical, biological, etc. Right? I also talked about like issues about, say, for example, like this dependent origination in a different way, about practice of mindfulness, and also how this affects it, right? So it's actually something that in Buddhism that people rarely think about. We always think in compartments. We're very used in thinking and pigeonholing and all the things. But actually, the whole teaching of Buddhism is actually very, very well integrated. All right. It's just that you have to take a step back and forget the pigeonholes, forget the labels, and just take them as they are. And then you will see that actually they're all connected. And it's actually a very, very comprehensive and complete picture that you can get. And also the methodology is there for you to use. Yeah.
All right. Once again, thank you so much, Dr. Kenneth Tan, for the talk. I think it is very relevant to our daily life. And I'm sure, brothers and sisters, some of you still have some question. I think afterwards, maybe can talk to Dr. Kenneth Tan privately or maybe over the lunch. Yeah. So once again, let's say 3 sadhus for Dr. Kenneth Tan. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So with all the good deeds, the Dhamma talk and the meditation that we have done today, we would like to do the dedication of metta, merits, and our closing homage. Please be Anjali position. Dedication of merits to all celestial beings. Akasata Chabumata Devanaga Mahidika Punyang Tam Anumoditwa Chiram Rakantu Loka Sasanam Akasata Chabumata Devanaga Mahidika Punyang Tam Anumoditwa Chiram Rakantu Dhammas Desanam Akasata Chabumata Devanaga Mahidika Punyang Tam Anumoditwa Chiram Rakantu Mamparam. Dedication merits. Let us invite all sentient beings to participate in our acquired merits. Etawata cham hehi sampatam punya sampadam sabe dewa anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya etawata cham hehi sampatam punya sampadam sabe buddha anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya etawata cham hehi sampatam punya sampadam sabe satta anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Let us dedicate the merits of participating in a wholesome Dhamma activity to our departed relatives and friends. Idang me nyatinang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Idang me nyatinang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Idang me nyatinang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. And of service dedication, I dedicate the merits which I have accumulated to the cultivation of my mind in order to bring happiness and benefits to all sentient beings. I dedicate the merits to my parents, children, spouse, relatives, friends, colleagues, and my adversaries, wishing them long life, good health, happiness, and prosperity. May we never part from the Triple Gem, and may we always walk the path towards enlightenment. Closing homage, let us pay respect to the Triple Gem. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddham Bhagavantang Abhivademi. Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami. Supatipano Bhagavato Sawaka Sangho Sanghang Namami. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. All right, please enjoy the lunch they've prepared for you. Yeah, and please do just feel free to get to know some new brothers and sisters. Yeah. Thank you.